You're about to listen to one of the most impactful episodes of The Shallow End to date. I'm Dave Schwartz, and my guest on this episode is Paul Hickey, host of the Sports Card Strategy podcast, owner of the No Offseason family of sports media websites, and all-around decent person. I consume a lot of content, and Paul is the only consistent content creator I listen to who specializes strictly in investing. And here's why. He's 100% transparent, honest, and genuine. You always know exactly where Paul stands. He's no wolf in sheep's clothing, no influencer pretending to be a collector. He doesn't pump and dump. He doesn't get involved in any of that nonsense. He will tell you directly to your face that he is in the sports card space to make money and help others make money. I wanted to talk with Paul because I thought he could help those of us who swim in the shallow end better understand ourselves as collectors and maybe show us a few moves we could make to improve our own collections. And he does not disappoint. His ideas, his insights, his authenticity, his devotion to his craft, all pay dividends in this episode. But what really stands out, and the reason I hope you're willing to give Paul a chance, is how he implores collectors to really think, even meditate, on the ideas of why we collect, what we collect, and who we collect. You're listening to The Shallow End. Thanks for tuning in to an episode that might just change, just a little, how we think about our collections. Paul Hickey, welcome to the podcast.
Dave, it's great to be here, man. Thanks for having me on.
There are lots of people who are aware of Sports Card Strategy and No Offseason, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But for those who don't, just give your background a little bit for your time here in this collecting space.
Absolutely. NoOffseason.com and the Sports Card Strategy Show, our mission is to help people make money flipping sports cards. And I'm sure we'll probably unpack the why behind that as we talk today. But my background is in several things. I was a sports card collector as a kid. I was born in 1981, so I'm 42. So I collected in the late 80s, early 90s, the junk wax era, as we call it, and had a blast. You know, everywhere I went, I would buy packs. I'd go to local card shops at the time. Not too many shows, but definitely like retail and hobby stores. And that was like the internet for me back then. So like reading the back of a card was like how I got all my sports information. And fast forwarding to college, late college, and after graduating from Michigan State, I worked for the Pistons. So I worked for the Pistons in sports information from 01 to 07. So the sports information on the back of the cards were really what kind of helped propel me into being a really good sports information and public relations person in the NBA. I just had the knack for what the sound bites would be, what the best information would be for the media, how to get that from the players and coaches, and how to amplify it everywhere and write about it and create content about it. So I have that background, and then throughout the years developed a web design and development and digital marketing skill set. Was able to create my own small digital marketing and web design company. And along the way, created my own side hustle websites for fantasy sports, did some fantasy sports freelance writing along the way. And NoOffseason.com at one time was a dynasty fantasy football website. One of the first dynasty fantasy football websites. And that was from 06 to 2011. And rebooted the brand in late 2020, early 2021 for sports cards. So that's probably the most brief I've ever been at my my background. So feel free to ask me any follow-up questions. I know we want to get into it.
So 01 to 07 when you were with the Pistons. I did not know that, which means you were there for the title run. Is that
I
right?
was. I was.
Do you have a ring?
I do. I have an NBA championship ring from '04. I have 2 WNBA championship rings as well. One from '03 and one from '06. They had the Detroit Shock at the time, and the Shock are no longer there.
So you were a collector as a kid. You went to Michigan State.
I did. I graduated from Michigan State in 2003.
So 2003. So do you still collect cards on some level? What is your connection now to the cards themselves?
Yeah, I know connecting with the cards is probably the biggest thing that everybody shares throughout the hobby, regardless of their why. Why they buy sports cards and collect them and flip them, invest in them, everything. So there is somewhat of a nostalgic collection that I have. I think nostalgia is probably like the one big one that everybody shares. Less nostalgia for me, just because, long story short, throughout my life, I've just become kind of a minimalist. Like, I don't like extra stuff in my life. Not just in my cards, but just in my life in general. I don't like extra stuff. I don't have that many clothes. We only have one car. We live in a very small house. We're minimalists. So I don't collect, partially for the reason of I just don't like extra stuff. But I do have somewhat of a nostalgic collection to some cards. And the reason I really love sports cards, though, is really more for the fascination that I have with the transactions. My business background and my sports information background, I have a fascination for what makes a card valuable and how to partake in the transactions along the way.
You sort of famously joke on your show, half joke, that you don't have a PC. You do have a little bit of one. Talk about your sort of half PC and your connection to it.
Yeah, you mentioned Michigan State. So my favorite basketball player of all time, I have like what I call my Mount Rushmore, just as an analogy of just people in general that I look up to, is Earvin Magic Johnson. He's on my Mount Rushmore. He's obviously like the best Michigan State Spartan basketball player of all time, even though I'm biased and I'll say that we have many. And yeah, I do have a small Magic Johnson PC. I think the trouble with Magic is he signed a lot of autographs. So his autographs they don't necessarily hold as much value as, say, like a Michael Jordan or a LeBron James autograph would. But Magic's still great, man. I mean, everything about Magic makes me smile. And so I do say on my show, you're right, on the Sports Card Strategy Show, I do say often I don't have a PC, but Earvin Magic Johnson would be the closest that I would have to a PC. And also, growing up in Michigan, Barry Sanders is near and dear to my heart. So I would say on the basketball side, Magic, and on the football side, Barry Sanders. And I'll throw one other one out there on the baseball side, Alan Trammell. Whenever I see an Alan Trammell card, it makes me smile. So I don't have a Trammell PC, but I feel like actually he would be maybe a third name that I would PC. So it would probably be Magic, Barry, and Alan Trammell. I know that's a random one, but Detroit Tigers, man, I grew up watching him. So there's the nostalgia for you.
That's fantastic. One thing I wanted to ask before we get into it, in the intro, I talked about the reason that I really respect your work so much is that there's no pretense to it. There's nothing devious. You call yourself Sports Card Strategy. The first time I listened to your show was very early on, and I was out in our backyard. We have a wooded area back there that had been overgrown by some weeds and some runaway mulberry trees, and I found it in Apple Podcast, and I listened to it. And while I don't view myself as an investor, I have lots of PCs that I put together for nostalgic reasons. I was so grateful that there was somebody who wasn't trying to pretend that they were a collector, but then actually they were just trying to flip and pump and dump. And you were so forthright from the very beginning about what your place was within this collecting space. If you would just say a little bit more about why you're here for the business end of it, because there are ways to make money as an investor in real estate or stocks or crypto or antiques or classic cars. Just say more about why you decided to occupy the sports card space and how you feel like you can contribute to it.
I will, but first I want to say thank you for the kind words about the Sports Card Strategy Show. I'm glad that you stuck with us because part of me feels like I was just fumbling early on, trying to provide value. But I feel like that's probably true of anything that we all start. We get better as we go, right? So my goal has been to just get better every show. And what I mean by get better is just try to provide more value to the audience. I think some people's value is in the entertainment or in the humor. I don't consider myself really funny. I don't try to be funny. So I tend to be more analytical and put myself in the audience shoes and give them plays that they can make to make money flipping sports cards. So I feel like we've gotten better at that. And I appreciate you staying also on the, I guess, the transparency or the organic side of things, just like not trying to be somebody that you're not. So it actually took me a year, like a full year before I started the Sports Card Strategy Show, of trying to figure out what kind of content I wanted to create in the hobby. I knew I wanted to be in the hobby, but I didn't know what my place was going to be. And so I think I found something that was organic to me, and then I just went all in on it. And that's Sports Card Strategy Show and nooffseason.com. So the reason why I've chosen to occupy the sports card space, the hobby as we call it, I still kind of get a kick out of the fact that we all call it the hobby. There's things I like about the fact that we call it the hobby, and then there's things I kind of, it's like a little bit cringy, or I kind of roll my eyes sometimes when it's called the hobby. But ultimately I'm proud of it. I like it. So it's simple, Dave. I mean, I love sports, man. I love sports. Like, sports is something that, from like what I said in my background, like I've, ever since I was a little kid, like I've been obsessed with sports. My dad was a high school basketball coach from the time I was 5. I was a gym rat. Um, Bonding with my dad is golf. My life is sports. It always has been sports. There was a time from probably age 25 through 35, literally the only thing I ever talked about with my friends was fantasy football. And that's sad, but like it kept us in touch with each other. So, I mean, sports cards is like a no brainer for me. It's like to be able to have a business in the hobby is the perfect fit for me, because I get to partake in some kind of sports information every moment of every day. And then better than that is I get to figure out how to turn it into something valuable for everybody else. Now, not everybody thinks it's valuable, because there's people in the hobby that don't flip and they don't invest in cards, and they just want to find a card to collect. And that's fine. Like that's obviously the hobby. But my view of it is sports cards is more than collecting sports cards. Sports cards is actually an industry that has its own economy. And I love business. I'm an entrepreneur. I love being an entrepreneur, and I love sports. So what I'm doing now is the perfect culmination of all of those things.
I'm going to get into a little bit more about what you said about this idea of it's an economy and collectors and investors. And I think if we look at a Venn diagram of those two, it is that there is an overlap there. I have a lot of little PCs, and little, I mean, um, it's not going to be paying for my retirement. I'll put it that way. I have a PC of athletes from St. Louis who I remember, whether it's the old football Cardinals or the baseball Cardinals or the Rams or the Blues or even the old Spirits of the ABA. I have a small PC of players that I collect who um, they're in their lesser known uniforms, right? So I have, I love cards of Allen Iverson on the Grizzlies, which he briefly was, Carmelo Anthony with the Houston Rockets, and some other ones as well. I'm 1980s baseball. I don't necessarily care about their value so much as I care about owning them and curating something that I enjoy to look at. As it's for nostalgia, it's for stress relief from a long day. And I think there are others out there too. That's how a lot of collectors are. You're curating this beautiful set. But I think just because you don't view it as an investment opportunity or as a retirement benefit, that doesn't mean that you don't care at all about what the cards are worth. And when you find something else that you want to add to your collection, sometimes you have to move what you like to fund something that you love. You can't just say, you know what, I'm going to only pay half my mortgage this month because I really want this whatever card that's gold out of 60 star ruby plaid purple blah 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 from 1999 to goes into it. You've got to do something else to fund it. And because of that, we have to care about what a card is worth because we want to get the most value out of it or as much as we can when we sell it. How much do you think about that side of the card space when you are making your content and thinking about what it is that your audience cares about? This idea of not just trying to move from a $5,000 card to a $15,000 card, but trying to move from a $25 card into a $100 card.
I'd say I try to think about it more now than I did when I first started the show because I've become more and more aware of how important it is for people to have a PC and how important that aspect of the economy is that I spoke about a second ago. There wouldn't be an economy if there weren't the personal collectors, the true collectors out there, the people who care 99% about their collection and the 1% about moving things out of their collection so they can fund their collection. So I try to think about it more. I try to think about it more because it's important. We all need it. The hobby needs it. The hobby economy needs it. But really because it's good content. It's better content. Like if you look at really my business, it's about creating good content for people to have a fun day. We all like really good podcasts, regardless of what the subject of the podcast is. If it's a good, compelling podcast, then we'll flex to the topic if we like things about it, if it can keep our attention, if we like the hosts, if we like how the hosts deliver things, if we like the stories, the way that it's presented, or if it helps us do practical things in our life. So I think the concept of funding your PC is what we call it on the Sports Card Strategy Show. We actually call it flip to fund your PC. Is an important one. So I try to think about it more. I think for me, it's something that I'm more and more curious about because one of the things that I like about what you do on your show, on this show, and in the Wolfpack family of shows is you guys educate me and others like me on PC journeys that I'm not as familiar with. So, PCing Matt Ryan, I think was one that was on the shallow end that got me thinking, okay, if it were me, what's the tipping point for me of like selling my big Matt Ryan cards? Why would I make the decision to continue to hold this Matt Ryan card and try to put myself in that person's shoes? So I try to think about it more and more. It's nowhere near my primary focus on the Sports Card Strategy Show, but I try to think about it more for sure.
And you were talking about sports card struggles. That's the
Sports card struggles. That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And he's picked up some fantastic Matt Ryan, some gold prisms or something like that in the last couple of months or so. It's really been fun watching him grow his collection. Great. So let's get now to the strategy side of things. Let's say if I or someone said, I'm going to give you my hobby self, and I'm going to become your protege. And what I want to do is I want to build the best basketball PC that I can or the best baseball PC that I can, and it's tied to some other angles as well. Let's talk about some methods and some ways to go about doing that. We hear about, oh, maybe there's good times to sell, maybe there are good times to buy. I want to talk first about data. And out there's Card Ladder, there's Market Movers, there's the eBay selling tools as well, and so many other things out there. How do you build your own knowledge base, and how would you recommend somebody else build their knowledge base to start to understand the data analytical side of the space to help give them a starting point to understand the right times to buy and to sell? Overall, I'm not talking about the rare card that out of 5 that happens to pop up where you got to pounce when it's there. But broadly speaking, how do you use the tools out there, and how would you encourage others to use them as well?
The first thing I would say to somebody is, before you jump in and start buying cards, realize that anybody can buy cards. So you have to challenge yourself to come up with the true reasons why you want to PC this player or this team or this sport or this rainbow, whatever it may be. I would really challenge them to reflect and get a little introspective with themselves and come up with a reason, like literally write out a paragraph or an essay why they want to PC this avenue. And the reason why is because anybody can buy cards, anybody can buy things. That's not that hard. That's not a challenge. I realize that like true collectors will say, yeah, but it's a challenge to go get the rainbow because you've got to get the out of 5 and you've got to get the 1 of 1, and that's hard to do. I get that. I get that because of the scarcity side. But really, it's not that hard to buy things. We can all buy things. And that's ultimately what collectors do. They buy things. They buy cards. That's not that hard. So I would want to make this person challenge themselves to have like a reason why. Because again, if we were to use Sports Card Struggles as an example still, my question to Sports Card Struggles would be, why are you keeping these cards? You could sell these cards to help your family out with other things, or to invest in other things, or to help other people out with other things, or to just have less things. But that's me, right? So I try not to project myself onto other people, but I do think it's important, because what if I allow this person that I'm consulting in this hypothetical example to just buy whatever they want, or give them the green light to start buying cards? We all know if they go buy, even if they want a PC Magic Johnson, we all know you can go get as many 1990s Skybox Magic Johnson cards as you want. And then you're going to be bored out of your brain with all those cards, and you're not going to know what to do with them, how to display them. So I want this person, even if you're going to PC, I want it to be a challenge for you to think through, how are you going to display them? What are you going to do with them? Why do you have them? When your significant other, your loved one, someone in your family challenges you as to like, why do you have this? You just have an answer, like have an answer for yourself when you go to bed at night. And you could have all these other things other than these sports cards laying around your house. Know why you're doing that. So I don't know if that resonates with you or with anybody out there in the audience, but I think that's the first thing. Now, you asked about the data and the tools. So that's where, once you have your why, I use Market Movers, full disclosure. Sports Card Investor pays me to write articles for them. MarketMoversApp.com. I'm an affiliate of theirs. Card Ladder. Part of the reason I don't use Card Ladder is because they don't have an affiliate program. They don't want to talk to people like me. In turn, I'm probably biased for thinking that their tool isn't as good as Market Movers. So maybe I'm wrong on that, but Market Movers is a tool that I use because it has however many, millions of cards in it. And it allows you to look up, when the best point is for anyone to buy, whether you're going to keep that card forever or whether you're going to flip it. Like me, I think we all don't want to pay the premium for the thing, regardless of where we fit in as a persona in the hobby, right? So I think, and I'm very data driven. My other business is a web design business that's called Data Driven Design, and so I'm used to looking at Google Analytics. I'm used to looking at data tools, and so part of the reason why I connected with the hobby is because of Market Movers, because I was like, holy crap, there's a tool like this, but for sports cards, and of course there's multiple tools like it. That's not the only one, but so I use that all the time. I look at those tools all the time, and of course the free ones, 130 point we all like, and so there's a lot of different ways to get the data. But I think to your point, even if you PC and you're not looking to flip, why not try to find the best deal on the card? So then you can have more in your budget for your PC.
I'll be honest. There's one thing you said there that, as you were saying it, it sort of hit me like a ton of bricks, and that was the idea of thinking about what you want to PC and really laying it out there. Maybe write 100 words or whatever it is to think about the why. And that led me to jump to the next idea, which is think about, imagine yourself, project yourself out collecting those cards. Then what?
Yes, exactly.
Right? What you've got them now, what are you going to do? You're going to have them. Right? And then once you have them, what is that for? I don't have an answer for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's where I struggle. So that's where I think like we can have a good discussion, and I would love to have a discussion with any of you out there listening to this, because I truly wonder what are you doing with them? Like, what I want to know, like, what are you doing with these things? I'm glad that you keep them, because in my mind, again, that's an important part of the economy. And I'm not trying to come in and like make a bunch of money and then leave. I love it here. I want to be here. So I want to help everybody in what their why is, what their mission is. But for me personally, like, that's exactly right. Like, I'm like, okay, so I can go buy this extra shirt that my wife thinks I would look good in, and I can wear it a few times, but yeah, then it's just taking up more space in my closet, and I don't really want it anymore. And then I'm like, and then what? And so to a certain extent, I think we need to look at our cards and say that to ourselves and be like, even if I'm gonna rip this box of wax and I'm gonna go for this case hit or go for this on card auto that I know is in this hobby box, what am I gonna do with all the other cards that I don't want? And so part of the reason I don't buy wax is because I don't know. I don't want that problem. So sometimes I just will pass on. I'll fade wax for that reason, because I don't have a why for what I'm going to do with that.
Right. And to be fair, I think there are a lot of people out there who do have their why. They do know what they're doing with it. For a lot, it's like, life can be stressful, right? Mortgages, jobs, partners, all that stuff. And to be able to escape into something from their childhood, or the ability to work toward completing something, there's something very therapeutic about that as well. And I don't want to downplay any of that. I put myself into that category where I like to work toward something. I'm a big history buff, and sometimes I like to bring in vintage cards because I know what the historical ties are. But I do think it's a good question that one can ask themselves as they go.
And not to cut you off, but you're exactly right. Those are legitimate reasons. Like, I will never discount those or make fun of anyone for whatever their reason is. My thing is, as long as you have that reason and you're projecting that out into the future, like we just said, and that's the reason, and you're going to be able to answer that question to yourself and to other people in your life as to why you have that card, and that's the reason. And it's like, lay off me. That's my reason. Good for you. Like, I'm genuinely super happy for you that you have that reason, and it doesn't have to be a complicated one or one that impresses anyone. It can be, this player means a lot to me, or just, I really like this artwork. Great. Like that. I mean, people buy art for that reason. So why should we not be able to buy cards and keep them for that reason? Right.
Right. So I know you are data driven, but I'm going to ask you to put on your psychological hat for a second. Why do you think? Well, I keep wanting to say people, but I'm going to put myself into the situation because I don't want to imply that anybody is a certain way. I'm just going to talk about myself here. And when I do say people, this is not for you, Paul, but for listeners, when I do say people, different strokes for different folks, but I'm just going to speak sort of generally. When there are so many tools out there, when we know that the beginning of the NFL season is a terrible time to buy cards, especially of active players, when we know that the best time to buy is sometimes during the off season, but the emotional highs aren't there then. We have the historical data, card ladder, 130 point market movers. We have all these tools at our disposal. Why do you think that impatience and impulse wins out so often when we know that it can be detrimental to our pocketbooks and to our wallets and to our bank accounts, which in turn affects our ability to get the cards that we want long term? Why do you think that we don't always act in our best interests for when to buy and when to sell?
I think it's endorphins. I think it's fun. I think it's more fun to watch a game and buy the card and get the instant gratification. I think it's sports cards version of like an in-game bet on a sports book where it just makes things more interesting. I think being patient is the hardest thing for all of us to be. And I joke on the show all the time. The running joke on our sports card strategy show is that I'm impatient. But the reality is that to be a good sports card flipper, you have to be patient because to your point, you have to buy and sell at the right time. So I think that for the average collector, they probably don't. This is an assumption on my part, so I could be totally wrong. I would love people's feedback on this. I think for the average collector, it's about the fun. It's about acquiring the card more so than it is about acquiring the card at the right time and for the right price. And so I think my guess is that the astute collector has like saved eBay searches for a particular card that isn't available all the time, right? And so again, they're less concerned with getting it at the right time and they're concerned with now it's available. I'm going to get it because they probably missed out on it maybe at another day, at an earlier date. So I'm jumping into some assumptions based on some things that I've learned from talking to people in the hobby for the last few years. But I think ultimately, like for probably the new person or just the average collector, it's like the element of endorphins and fun, and it's not fun to be patient and have like the strategy behind it. But for the astute collector, like the real collector, like they're probably actually their strategy is to like have these saved searches and like jump on these rare cards when they're actually available. So then you're kind of taking the element of timing the market out of it as well. So there's like two different levels there.
I feel like here we need to draw a line between collecting players who are active and collecting players who are retired. The cliche is Hank Aaron, Dr. J, Magic Johnson. They can't blow out their knee. Well, they can, but it doesn't matter, right? We wish them the best. Babe Ruth is dead. Hank Aaron's dead. But there's less risk involved. Where if the Dr. J market or the Magic Johnson market or the Joe Montana market, if it starts to go down, it's going down because the entire market is just probably, going to a down spot right now. Whereas someone like Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, they're week to week, quarter to quarter, sometimes play to play, where you can just see things vanishing off eBay in the middle of a Ravens game or in the middle of a Chargers game. Is there a difference? And how do you talk to your listeners and talk to your community about collecting active players versus non-active players?
Yeah. So earlier on when I mentioned like it took me a full year to try to figure out what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be in the hobby content creation space, I had to make a lot of decisions. And so one of the decisions I made is like, okay, well, even though I love the retired athletes and I think I probably love the vintage cards as much as I love the ultra modern cards, like just from a design standpoint, like nostalgia for sure. The vintage side wins on that. I had to make a decision because if my goal is to help people make money flipping sports cards, there really is no vintage flipping market. You could argue that there's a vintage investing market, but I'm really not even going to be good at that because my strengths are more how to help people come up with selling markers. And really, there are no selling markers really for vintage cards other than death, which no one likes to talk about. It's not like it's seen as like taboo, I think, to list people's cards when something happens to them from like a health standpoint or life or death standpoint. So I chose to fade vintage. I made a strategic decision in my content to like strictly fade vintage. We've had a lot of people come and say vintage is such a big part of the hobby. You can make money with vintage cards. Absolutely. Like there's sports card strategies for vintage cards, and I'm fascinated by them. And I want to try to create more content for them. But in terms of like how you can really win with what we do at the Sports Card Strategy Show, which is help you make money flipping, it's just hard to do with vintage because there are no real selling markers, and so it's really hard to say, okay, well you got to hold this card for 40 years, and then we think it's going to go up. Well, that's not really compelling either. So, at least in my opinion, for what we do. So yeah, it's sad, but I've made the decision to basically fade the talk on vintage cards. I think there's times where we see something that's an opportunity for everybody to partake in a vintage card. And there's different definitions of vintage, right? There's probably some like cards that we would all agree are vintage cards, and there's probably like a pocket or a decade where we're kind of like, well, let's just call it like a retired athlete card or Hall of Famer card, whatever. All those things are the same thing to me because if you're not an active player, there are no real markers for you that I and my team are confident making flipping advice or investing advice for you. So we just fade those. That doesn't mean that that's not a huge part of the hobby, and we don't want to be figuring out ways to partake and create content there. But um, I think grading is like, so for example, buying old collections and set breaking is a great thing to do and figure out how to, I think, reinvigorate the market with those cards that have maybe been sitting around in storage for years. So that's something that we talk about on the show. And then grading, we talk about grading on the show all the time. So I know there's probably different opinions on how many slabs are out there and different things like that. And is it okay to crack a slab and submit it to another grading company and all that? The reality is like you can make money doing that. So we talk about it.
So I have a Juan Soto problem, and I've written about it before, and I've talked about my problem with Juan Soto, where I think over the last few years I have bought and then sold all my Juan Soto cards, anywhere between 30 and 50 at this point. Never all that high end, maybe a couple here and there. He's hard to keep because, one, sort of infamously, every April and May he's terrible, and then June hits and he turns into Ted Williams and something happens. On the other side of that, he's also 24 years old, 25 years old, which means to really know what he's going to turn out to be, we won't know until the late 2030s. When we have a chance to really look back and see who he's going to be. He could be this generation's superstar. He could also be this generation's Don Mattingly, where who knows, in 2027 he hurts his back, and next thing we know, he was just some guy we look back on as saying, remember when he was there. He's really indicative of why collecting active players is so volatile, because you never know what could go wrong with them. Mike Trout is a perfect example. Mike Trout has some really scary parallels to Don Mattingly, where he looked to be a bona fide first ballot, 90% of the vote Hall of Famer, Mattingly was, and then his back just got shredded. He's not even in the Hall now. And Trout, like Mattingly, had MVPs, and he hasn't been healthy now in 5 years, 6 years, along those lines. What would you say to someone like me who is considering, once again, getting into the market for an active player. And in the case of someone like Soto, it is now essentially almost the baseball offseason. What kind of research should I be doing? What kinds of things should I be considering about whether or not I want to, again, put some of my resources into someone like a Juan Soto?
I would say your paragraph thesis that we talked about a few minutes ago better be really, really strong and have more support cases than some of the ones that we threw out as examples. I would say you can't just like the way a Juan Soto card looks, because chances are you're going to be paying more money now to hold that card well into when Juan Soto's retired. If you're going to PC that card, we're talking about the context of PCing now. So my assumption is that you're not looking to sell that card until, really potentially never looking to sell that card. So in theory, you want the value to go up or at least stay the same and not dip too much. But I think because we're talking about the era where sports cards are at like a peak of popularity, we're talking about high print runs. And we're talking about an athlete who, as good as he is and as young as he is, there are other upcoming stars that are getting more and more attention from that athlete, and there always will be. So you run that risk of, even if he doesn't get injured, even if he is a Hall of Famer, he could just be a Hall of Famer. He might not be the Hall of Famer from this era that everybody cares about. So I would say you better have a really strong thesis that you can feel good about as your why for why you would keep Juan Soto cards and a Juan Soto PC. Because to me, Juan Soto is a perfect example of a player that, if you want to PC Juan Soto, he's not going to retire anytime soon, but I would wait till like a really, really low dip in the market to get like bargain basement prices as you possibly can. And by the market, what I actually really mean by that is the seasonality of the baseball card market and the relevance of Juan Soto. So if you really like Juan Soto, I'll just say this real quick. What I mean is, if you really like Juan Soto, I would wait till he's out of the news, where maybe he's injured. It's not a serious injury, but it's just people will, when he's out of the news and he's borderline irrelevant, whether it's the off season, he's not in any trade rumors, he's not coming up on free agency, there's literally nothing to talk about with Juan Soto for like a month. That's a good time to buy Juan Soto for a PC. The risk that you run, to your point, is he ever going to be relevant? Really ever? Like, is he ever going to, like, what awards is he going to win? And even then, who cares that much? How many World Series MVPs is he going to win? How many hits is he going to have at the end of his career? How many home runs is he going to have at the end of his career? That's where you get to a point where now the player becomes in the conversation with some of the legends, and in the top 10 or the top 5 of all time. And that's a guy you want to have in your PC, I think. I don't think you want to have a guy in your PC unless you knew him or you met him or he changed your life in some way. Maybe you never met him, but he still changed your life in some way. That could be a reason for having a Juan Soto PC. So people out there might be thinking I'm crazy for saying this, but that's just my take on a guy like Juan Soto. So maybe you do have a Juan Soto problem.
No, and I love it. I really appreciate that perspective, right? Because there are plenty of Hall of Famers who people don't even know are Hall of Famers, and that's not even the right metric with which to begin. All right, I want to get into nooffseason.com, but I have one more question. I would be negligent if I didn't ask you about Victor Wembanyama. And what are you saying about him on your show? What are you hearing about his market and those cards? And this is not my lane at all. But this whole, he's under contract to sign with Fanatics and Topps, but Panini has the contract for the NBA and the Players Association and everything else. What kind of conversations are you having about Big Vic on your show right now?
Yeah, I think he fits into so many different cool categories for me. He fits into the category of the thought process I have. One of the many strategies that we create at the Sports Card Strategy Show and at nooffseason.com is you can just pick one player. If you want to flip sports cards to make money, there are players that you can just pick one player and do it with. And so far, he's been that guy for me. So, hate me if you must, but I was able to make a few $1,000s profit flipping his Sports Illustrated for Kids cards. I recently was able to make a few $1,000s profit flipping his Tops Now releases that I got graded as PSA 10s. And I anticipate being able to do the same thing with these Panini Instant releases that just came out. And the reason why is because he's a game changer for the hobby. Like, he's a game changer for the hobby. He's the guy that had the big deal with Fanatics where they did a raffle or a contest for his auto 99 green auto, like the first auto ever signed. He's a teenager from France that is the number 1 overall pick. He's 7'4", 7'5". He plays like nobody I've ever seen play basketball. So I'm fascinated by him as a icon, global icon, and a game changer for the league. He's going to be the face of the league for decades. I hope he stays healthy. I think the only thing that would prevent that from happening is an injury, and that's kind of the same for any player. Like Derrick Rose is not 7'4", but that happened to Derrick Rose, so it can happen. I think so. Wembanyama fits like this strategy for me of you can make money just continuing to flip his cards, and I think it's because of the perceived risk of injury because of his height. I do think it's smart to move in and out of Wembanyama cards. As we're talking right now in late 2023, the reality is like less than 1% of his cards that will be released, less than 1% of his rookie cards that will be released have been released so far. So in theory, like you don't want to be holding really any Victor Wembanyama cards. I suppose if you're a PC person, it would be nice to have one of his Sports Illustrated for Kids cards. It might be nice to have one of the cards that I've already mentioned. So I'm fascinated by him. We're talking about him as a guy that you could use this strategy of moving in and out of to continuously profit from due to the hype period right now. And so I don't know if that answers your question from like, what do I think of him as a long-term investment or a long-term hold or whatever. That's hard to say, but like for the right now, to me, he's the athlete to be looking for opportunities to just get in and out of, not to hold long-term.
Great. So you talk about this on the Sports Card Strategy Show. You talk about it at nooffseason.com. No Offseason has really grown. Just take a little bit of time to talk about No Offseason and what you're trying to accomplish with this venture.
So I want nooffseason.com to be the place that people go to find information to help them make money flipping sports cards. And what I mean by that specifically is you'll find articles that run the gamut of which cards you can buy raw in bulk to submit to a grading company. Most of the time it's PSA, 99% of the time it's PSA, to give you a high floor. You're going to need a certain amount of cash flow to make the play, but we're writing about cards that you can buy in bulk raw, submit to PSA. We're doing all the math for you, and we're telling you that you're likely to profit between X and Y by making this play. So if you have the cash flow, go ahead and do it. We're doing that repeatedly, consistently. We also do things where I mentioned cracking slabs earlier. So we're writing articles about that as a play. We're also looking at, okay, what are cards that you can buy where you don't have to grade? You don't have to increase the value of them yourself through some kind of grading, but you can anticipate based on player performance. So I think my thesis is that like every one of us like would love to be a GM of our favorite sports team or the owner of our favorite sports team. So to me, that's kind of what we're doing at nooffseason.com. We're kind of like looking at all of the cards like, hey, who can we just buy low and sell high? And I know that's cliche to say, but like that's essentially what every professional sports team is doing. They're trying to draft or trade for players at a particular value and then help them get to another higher value, right? Like that's the point. So that's what we're doing, where a guy like Cam Thomas is a good example for me, because I talked about Cam Thomas. For those of you who don't know, he's a guard for the Brooklyn Nets, and he's just a scoring machine. He's a bucket. So Cam Thomas is a guy, when he wasn't getting any playing time as a rookie, but his rookie ticket autos came out, I said, hey, these are like $20. Dude's probable that he's going to drop 40 at some point, and then the card's probably going to go up. He dropped 43 games in a row last year, so that those cards went up quite a bit. And then he started this season off very hot. So we try to do stuff like that, where like, here's a Cam Thomas card that you can buy. You don't have to get it graded. It's actually not that expensive compared to some of the other cards, but sell it when he goes off. So we're also putting out, we have the Overflow show. So for those of you who like the Sports Card Strategy show, but want more of us, that's a premium member benefit. So that's where it's really hard. Like what I ultimately want to do at nooffseason.com, and I'm trying to build this, is I want it to be a recommendations engine. So I want to be able to have somebody come and say, here's what I want to get out of my sports card investment. Like, here's what I think is fun. Here's who I like. Here's who I don't like. And then I want to spit back out at them, okay, here are the exact cards to buy and the exact portfolio mix for you, from low risk to high risk and everything in between, that you should buy based on the questionnaire that you filled out. That's kind of what we do at the Overflow show, because we allow anybody to, any of our premium members can ask any amount of questions at any time, and then we answer them that same week on the Overflow show. And I think it's valuable for all premium members, because like if you had a really nice question, I amplify that answer to everybody in the audience, and then everybody gets the value out of that. The other thing we're doing that I'm really excited about is called Sports Card School. So you can go to sportscardschool.com. It'll take you to the page on nooffseason.com, but there's 3 levels of courses. One is for beginners or people who are re-entering the hobby, like I did a few years ago. Another one is for advanced flippers, and then another one is for high rollers. So I wasn't really sure what to call the third course, but I'm just calling it for high rollers, because that's really what it is. That's for people who want to make smart decisions, spending tens of thousands of dollars on sports cards, versus the beginner course, which is like, how do I not blow this $15, right? So we're trying to help everybody. We're rolling out, the first lessons have already dropped. We're going to be dropping lessons, like multiple lessons every week, behind the paid wall there at nooffseason.com. So there's free content, there's premium content, there's the premium podcast, the Overflow show. And then the Sports Card Strategy show is like, we're just basically going to give you all of our knowledge on a weekly basis for free. So if you don't want to spend any money on any of our premium content, then we sure as heck appreciate your support listening to the Sports Card Strategy show, and that helps us as well. So hopefully that's a decent overview, but I'm happy to answer any other questions you have about it.
Sure. Well, Paul, thank you. You've given us a lot to chew on and a lot to think about. So as we do wrap up here, we're just about at the end of our time. Tell everyone where they can find you across the different outlets.
So we're on all of the places you get your podcasts. You just search for Sports Card Strategy Show. So that includes, obviously, the big 2 are Apple and Spotify, but anywhere you get your podcasts. Sportscardstrategy.com is the URL to go to for all things related to the show. So that's where our entire episode library is. We also stream on YouTube. So if you would like to get in the live chat, we stream at 8 a.m. on Mondays, which is a little bit early for a lot of people, 8 a.m. Eastern time, because if you're on the West Coast, it's 5 a.m. But youtube.com/Paul Hickey. But all of that information is at sportscardstrategy.com. nooffseason.com as well has all that information on it, but that is more of the hub of all of the written articles and the additional content. And then real quick, we do have a network of shows. The nooffseason.com Sports Card Network includes not only the Sports Card Strategy Show, but Hoops and Cards is a great podcast for basketball collectors. Football Card Quest is an amazing podcast for fantasy football players who want to make money flipping football cards. That's really fun. And Graybo's Giblets is a podcast for sports betting. So if you want to information on how to win your sports bets, which I'm not good at, but they are. Graybo's Giblets is a member of the nooffseason.com sports card network. So the network includes shows outside of our feed, and they do a great job. So we're happy to be partnering with them.
That's great. Well, Paul, thank you for your honesty and your transparency with things. As you were talking there, I actually went into my eBay watch list and deleted the Juan Soto's out of there. What you said helped me avoid making another giant mistake. But no, seriously, thank you so much. And thanks for appearing on the show.
Thanks for having me, Dave. And just real quick, like one parting shot, like I think I said your why like 14 times on this episode. And at sportscardschool.com, lesson number 1 for beginners is identify your why. And the whys I have are fun, funding a personal collection, income, wealth, and bragging rights. And I would love to hear from any of you if you feel like I'm off on these, or if you want to add whys. I would love it if you DM me on Instagram at SportsCardStrategy and just tell me that you love Iowa Dave and that you have a feedback on your why. I would love to hear from you guys.
And that why is indeed so important. Good words. Paul, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dave.